Yeah, but the support is waning. It's just getting worse and worse.
But anyway, what would be the alternative as far as chatting with them?
Well,
We cannot use Telegram, we cannot use WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, all those things.
or we can. So the wishy stuff actually is on Telegram right now. Of course, that's unofficial.
But we could have some more official.
Good morning, Alexei warned me.
Carlos, yes, he escaped, so he will be home before Brexit.
Yes, several people told me that.
Well, he in particular, because he doesn't have a British passport, is concerned about, and probably is nothing, but he just doesn't
He's a
want
UK
to.
citizen.
What?
He's a UK citizen.
Is he? Oh, I thought he was still using a Russian passport.
Maybe he is, but
Anyway, whatever the case, I will start these around. But I note that we often have big rooms, not regular people.
yes.
And I note that you make requests for 60 people. The meeting requests for 60 people.
Yes.
So you might consider that for next time.
Can
Putting a
you
lower number.
can you make
Because we would have fit into Carlin 3, but that's a 50-person room.
yeah?
So you give it to us.
I would like to make a request for 60 people for the first meeting, which is approximately the number we have, and 40 for the second meeting.
I will talk to the secretariat about whether.
Right now, I can put in that number.
Yeah, no, I
I
will.
could have added it to the comments, but the comments is limited.
Right, you can always add to the
50
comments.
characters.
I will ask the secretariat if it's reasonable to change the tools.
Yeah.
So it's time.
Good morning. It is allowed to sit in the front seats, even if you haven't read all the drafts.
It is encouraged
So-
to sit in the front seats.
Actually, it is.
Even if you're just doing your email, you can come sit in the front seats.
Okay, so it's Friday. I think by this time, most people have read the note well. I should mention that this room has a really weird acoustics. So the chairs will probably be wandering around the room trying to find a spot where they can understand anything. Note well and all that. We have 3 scheduled blocks on the agenda: core applications, a resource directory and Coral, and a new idea from Jen Zhao. If we get to it. But we also have accumulated a bit of unscheduled stuff that we will do right after this introduction. Anything else we need to be doing today? Anything we should not be doing today? Okay, so Marco isn't even here yet. He is. You were encouraged to come to the front. Not only are the distances large here, the lighting isn't up to snuff. Anyway, let me quickly introduce the topic. So we have had a second proposal for a congestion control algorithm for Coral, for an advanced congestion control algorithm. And we looked at that and we generally like it. But then we got stuck on IPR declaration, which is under data tracker IPR 3227. And people looked at that and said there's not enough information. And so we stopped discussing it at IETF 103. Since the statement has been updated, and one of us, I don't remember who, alerted the mailing list to that fact. So the declaration has been updated by a statement about the assertion of that patent claim. And the claim owner chose to make the patent available for essential parts of an IETF standard. So it's not for information documents, so it's just for standards track documents, and something that is needed to do this standards track document. So far, we have considered handling congestion control algorithms as informational, but I think it's not particularly hard to go for standards track there. And as is customary for this kind of IPR declaration, there is a reciprocity clause, so the license expires the moment you sue Huawei on some other patent claim. So it's your classical defensive patent construction. So we like unencumbered stuff, but the IETF often has been able to work with technology that had this kind of strings attached to it. The procedures say that it's the job of the working group to decide whether we can continue pursuing this. And I don't want to decide it today. I want to get information on whether the working group now thinks to have sufficient information to make the decision. So is there anything missing to make the decision, or do we have all information we need? Now I realize congestion control already is a fringe issue, and people who understand patents are by definition fringe people. So maybe a small number of people in this room who even know what this is about. But if you have an opinion on this, please state it. Okay, I kind of made my opinion known, which is that this is a kind of construction that has been used in other places in the IETF and has been deemed acceptable. So my opinion would be we are in a position to make a decision. So we will take this to the list. Marco, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, Marco Koivu. So actually, I'm not intending to make a comment on IPR issues, but but in case the working group happens to decide to take this or adopt this document, I'm just wondering how are we able to get enough interest among the people in this working group, given that this is timer mechanism and essentially congestion control, where the expertise is basically there in the transport area. So in my opinion, there should have been more liaison with the transport area, with the COCOA, for example, as well, because it's basically in the same area. So this is just my slight concern, whether there is enough interest and energy in this working group for this particular document, in case it is adopted.
Yes, so the next step would be a working group adoption call. The question is, which working group should do this work? I'm a bit hesitant to say another working group should do this work, because this is really our protocol. So far, we have done work in this space both on the original congestion control in 7252 and on the other proposal by trying to pull in the ICCRG and the transport area as much as possible. And I think that's just a practice we should continue.
Right. So I'm not proposing that it's going to be any other working group, but just exactly that how we kind of collaborate with the other areas. Yeah. So in this case, maybe TCPM or TSV.
So for COCO, Alexei even delegated the shepherding, the ISG side of the shepherding to Mirja equivalent to the transport AD, and I would expect he would do the same thing again when we finish this. Okay, so working group adoption call on the list is next. Normally I would ask the room whether we should do an adoption, but I think you might need some time to weigh these IPR issues, so I think this is better done on the list. Okay. Where are the slides? The slides are gone.
I cannot see anything. What are you seeing?
It's uploaded. The problem is that the data tracker pages require reloading in weird ways to actually get the right link. It's not made to actually work. This guy should. Yes. Okay, so for some slightly happier development outside the working group, we have had a SecDispatch discussion about the ad hoc proposal. The underlying situation is that we have adopted DTLS as our mandatory to implement security scheme 6 years ago. And now we have another security scheme, which is called OSCOR, but that security scheme needs an authenticated key agreement protocol to really cover the same kind of situations that the DTLS environment covers. So we have discussed something called ad hoc as one proposal for that, and it has also been discussed in other working groups such as ACE, but it never found an official home. And both the security area and the art area have the idea of having dispatch working groups which dispatch work either to new working groups, to AD-sponsored documents, to and so on, which means that it's not a solitary decision of an area director how to handle work, but there's actually community input on that. And SecDispatch had an interim meeting, an extra meeting just to discuss this a couple of weeks ago. And the ADs have since taken in the results of that interim meeting and are now proposing to spin up a short-term working group to complete an authenticated key agreement protocol using ad hoc as the starting document. Links are to the mailing list messages are on the slides. This is something that probably fits quite well to what this working group is trying to achieve. But of course, it would be interesting to hear whether the people in this room think this is a good way to handle this. So in the best case, I would like to have something like an in-room consensus from this room that I can relay to SecDispatch. We like this, or no, we want to do it in our working group, or whatever we want to tell them.
Ivaro Petrov speaking as individual. I think this is a good way to go.
I didn't hear that.
I think this is a good way to go
Okay,
as
thank you.
individual.
Thank you. Any other statements?
And Peter van der Stok, if you have OSCOR, I think ad hoc is something you should like to use actually. But if it should be in a narrowly scoped working group or that we should do it in ACE, I have no opinion. Okay.
En tout temps, I think it's very well fitted for LP1 network, so it's a very interesting work.
Okay, so that would be the view of the LP1 group.
Are Keränen without hats. I think this is a good way to go.
Okay. So before we have 10 more plus ones, let me just get a show of hands. Who thinks this is a good arrangement from the point of view of the core working group? Only the right side of the room. Well, yeah, to the left of the aisle, but yeah, you are still to the right of me. And who thinks that this working group should state an opinion that another arrangement might be better? Okay, so I will relay that to the SEC dispatch mailing list as the in-room consensus of the core working group. Jörn, is there anything else you want to do under this item? Okay. 13, Jaime.
Yeah, it's a very brief update. So we are moving a bit forward on the use of GitHub, and I was just wanted to summarize what other groups are using to see where core would like to go, basically. So in Deep, for instance, they're using GitHub for issue tracking instead of the mailing list, but basically the author or the editor needs to curate the list and just choose before every ITF meeting what to present or what not to present and so on. So they're not using any tagging or anything like that. In core, we do have some preliminary tagging, but it's not like we have a mandatory, well-structured list of tags. And then again, also, we don't have a specific discuss tags to be discussed with the working group or any kind of milestones or anything like that. But maybe we are a bit step ahead on that. And then HTTP, for instance, a bit ahead of us in a sense. They have discuss tag, they have other tags based on topics. They use milestones, and essentially they work everything there. So I would like to propose, okay, that's Mangold, to basically track the document live from the very beginning, individual submission to working item, RFC, everything on GitHub. So for those who really like email, we could also have email batches. It can be easily configured to send email batches every couple of weeks or every week or whenever you want. We could also, if people are happy with that, we could assign issues to a specific experts that really know a particular field, but that means that they would have to check every now and then also. We also could assign, we could also have milestones on a specific, it could be either based on the draft lifetime, you know, when we do working about option or working on last call, or specific features or sections. And I think also the more important one would be to start using tagging. For instance, we could have the discuss tag if we want to discuss it with the working group, and very other tags. So some of the stuff we wouldn't even need to discuss because it's editorial errata or some other way of working. And then last, this is not supported by the ITF at the moment, but it would make sense maybe to consider having our own ITF GitLab server so that we don't depend on GitHub only. But yeah, so basically, and I just finished, we will have some trial with some individual submissions and perhaps also with one working group adopted document. I'm looking for guinea pigs, not just looking guinea pigs. And yeah, that's it. Yep.
Dave Taylor. My comment is on the discussion using GitHub point. One of the things that Martin talks about in the various, using GitHub in your favorite working group is the working group has to decide where it wants sort of active debate to occur, whether active debate should occur on the mailing list or in the GitHub issue itself. And either one can be done, and the working group should decide. Often working groups choose to, or sorry, a number of working groups choose to say active, debate should happen on the mailing list, and summary should happen in the GitHub issue. That's actually the policy of TEEP, and we need to be better at actually enforcing that, because I just sent out an email to the TEEP list this morning, basically saying that on one of the issues where I started seeing some discussion in GitHub. And so I think that's a job for this working group to specifically decide that. I mean, if you're going to be using GitHub, where do you want arbitrary responses? If you want people to be quoting in line other people's things, where do you want to have that? It sounds like you're proposing to have that in the GitHub issue itself on the mailing list, but I wanted to verify which thing you were actually proposing.
I'm proposing, so today, de facto, some of the working group items are discussed in the GitHub, and there is not so much traffic on the mailing list, and there's really, really necessary some consensus, but the authors tend to work together like that. So I always just wanted to maybe formalize it in some way, but of course we cannot force people to do that. So we need to,
Dave,
that's why this is happening.
Before you go away, I'm going to ask people here who have experience with other SDOs that have picked up CoAP, what their view would be, which of the alternatives we have actually would be better for getting participation from those SDOs. The answer may be it doesn't make a difference because there's some other obstacle preventing participation, or the answer might be mailing list is better, GitHub issues is better.
So I presume you're asking me, like for an OCF perspective. I think it probably wouldn't make a significant difference to OCF. I can say that OCF doesn't currently use GitHub for issue discussion. I want to split OCF from IoTivity, right? And I'll give you two different answers there just because I'm at the mic. OCF uses mailing lists, and it uses its own document repository system that's called Kavi, neither of which is GitHub. It may use GitHub for data models or something like that, but not for the actual discussion. IoTivity uses the mailing list and GitHub, and it does issue tracking on the mailing list. It doesn't have a good issue tracking history, I would say, but it does have GitHub issues, but all the active discussion, to the extent that there is active discussion, is on the mailing list, and I think you're on that list. But that's the OCF perspective. I don't think it would make a significant difference, but the history is they haven't really used issue tracking for the discussion per se.
If I might, in OMA, we are also using GitHub for quite some time. The transition was kind of painful at the beginning because many people didn't use it. We kind of use both at the moment for issue tracking for basically even drafting the specification is done in GitHub. Some of all the discussions are on the mailing list, but less and less in my opinion. That's like what M2M.
Yeah, Bill from Tampere University. I'd like to second what Dave just said. There's a lot of confusion on how we can actually use GitHub. Could I propose that we actually come up with a best practices document for the working group, because the guidelines seem to change from working to working group. And firstly, I have faced the same problems. Getting a discussion going from the mailing list and passing them into issues is not necessarily a trivial thing. And being an editor of some documents right now, I have been using the tagging system, and I've actually discovered that it's a good idea to use GitHub for more than just issue tracking and as a code repository. So we've got continuous integration going on. At the same time, GitHub also offers different kinds of insights where you can actually see the activity on different drafts. And it's difficult to know where to draw the line, how far we should go into these issues as individual authors or as working group document authors. So I think it would be really good if you can get some kind of a best practices document out of this.
So part of the reason we would like to do the tryout, this I already discussed with Christian. Sorry. We wanted to give it a tryout, see what is the outcome, see if it is actually feasible. Maybe I can compile later on some document for it, but it's just experimentation at the moment. It's not like we are going to switch everything right now.
Okay, yeah.
But at least to try.
Jim Schott. I have two concerns about discussing issues in GitHub. The first is I do not know if the IETF policy on archiving of discussions on mailing lists has changed or not. The second is, I don't always know that I need to go and follow a new project whenever it starts up. So therefore, I don't ever find out that discussions are occurring if the discussions are occurring on GitHub. I mean, if it is one big project and everything's in the same tracker, well, then I only have to do it once and it's not that hard to follow. If, on the other hand, you have a different project for each document, that means that all of a sudden I don't actually see discussions, and that always worries me.
However, if we have every document in one project, then the issue tracker will be insane. It will be a mess of comments from any draft and any issue. And also regarding the storage of the data, we had our own GitLab, sorry. If ITF had their own GitLab, of course you can there apply whatever policy. That's another plus for using our own ITF GitLab if it would exist.
AD interrupt. The HTTP BIS working group has handled this by having a separate mailing list set up and a script on GitHub that sends all of this to that mailing list. It's not on the HTTP BIS mailing list directly, so it doesn't flood it, but you can always subscribe to this mailing list, this other mailing list, or look at its archives. That takes care of the archive problem because it's all archived in IETF, and it takes care of the, I gotta go to 15 different projects to go figure out what's going on. It still may not be your cup of tea, but at least it addresses those issues. And the other thing is that I presume everybody knows there's a new working group called Git to discuss these issues about how we interface with Git, and you should definitely participate there.
Yeah, I will say that the SACM working group solved this issue by subscribing the IETF mailing list as an observer to all the projects, which makes things messy in a different way.
I realize I'm still new. Sorry, Brendan Moran here. I realize I'm still a bit new here, but this does raise the question of accessibility. GitHub is not and has not always been available to everyone. And that seems to be one of the core things about the IETF, making it available to everyone, and GitHub isn't. Sometimes it is, but not always, and we need to be cognizant of that.
Which is another reason why having our own GitLab would make a lot of sense also.
Okay, we don't really want to second guess the work that is going on in the Git working group, and we might as well wait until they have produced more of a result. But the objective here of this was that maybe as a working group, we should start our own small controlled experiment on this to gain some experience so we can make a good decision. So this is not about completely swapping the model in which you work, but setting up an experiment. And I think your next slide said something about trying this with an individual submission. I was actually going to propose to try this with the resource directory, because now in the working group last call, in the working group last call phase, actually there will be a lot of technical issue management that actually is done quite well on GitHub. So I would expect that handling the working group last call comments on GitHub would be easier that way. So that would be my suggestion, but I'm certainly interested in hearing what the main editors think about that.
I can of course speak for all involved for RD, but there is tagging already there, and I am already replicating the discussion points on the tracker, so would be fine for me.
That was Christian. I'm Dave Thaler. Just want to respond. The Git working group, I was there, and my understanding is you're not going to see a result of that working group that says you must do X, right? That the working group has a bunch of choices, and so I just wanted to clarify that you shouldn't wait for some answer to come down, right? They'll just have, here's a cookbook and your working group can choose which of these options work for you. And so I don't think that there's any reason that you have to wait for anything from the Git working group. If anything, they're just providing for guidance for Git newbies. But if you're already using Git, there's no reason, I think, to wait.
Yeah, this is Barry. I never intended to imply that. I was just encouraging people that if you cared, participate.
Clarifying Carson's summary.
Yeah, I was just interested in the results of that group, because having that cookbook would be good, and maybe having some tools slightly more honed than they are right now would also be good. But I also think we can start doing this experiment now.
Peter van der Stok, I just wanted to make this down-to-earth remark. I already have problems explaining the phases through which the document goes with the normal IETF procedure. If you're going to add in the GitHub even more states, then it becomes very difficult to explain what's going on. So I mean, you should be very careful that all this tagging follows what goes on in the standard IETF process, and that all the others are just alternative and should be used such that it is not to be confused for other people.
Yeah, I mean, my intention is not to change the IETF process at all. Same stages, same steps.
So I think it would be nice to have some of the HTTP BIS tooling that sends summaries of the GitHub activity to the list every Sunday. So maybe that's something we should procure to make sure that there is no disconnect there. But I'm also hearing that people would be quite content with having a small limited experiment on the resource directory completion process now, and then we can evaluate that and see whether we widen this experiment. Fine. You actually have to run to this speaker to understand what anybody says on the microphone. It's useless. Thank you. Not my turn. Michael's turn. Michael, are you online? So, Michael, do you have speaker privileges, or do we do this using the queue? Okay. It's like 1 a.m. in California, so I'm not blaming Michael here. So maybe we can just quickly go to the next document, DynLink. Who wanted to present that? Bill? Okay, Michael is there, so let's go back to where we are. Yes, go ahead.
I figured out what to do. Can you hear me?
You are under at least 5 layers of wool blankets, but yes, we can hear you.
Okay, maybe this is a little better. No. Okay. So go ahead and advance the slide. Okay, so there's really only one open issue, which is don't use new status code, and figure out how to handle empty topics, topic lifetimes, and data lifetimes in some other ways that we're working out. And those are specifically, next slide, please. On empty topics, the issue is that topic has been created but not published to yet. So what does the broker return? So what we worked out there is that we'll have the response wait until there is something published. With COAP and observe, that's not really a problem. You get an ACK and then you know, the response doesn't have to come back. There will be some timeout possibly, but we'll have the application layer work that out. The publisher can always publish an empty payload. The problem is PubSub only transmits payloads, only representations, if you will, and content format. So it doesn't really know how to construct an empty payload. It needs the publisher or the topic creator to do that. So we're going to keep it simple and write that up, and then depend on things like accept all and nothing to see here sort of, or multi-part content formats to handle the case more gracefully. But even with CinML, you can just send a bracket and an empty payload, and the subscriber can understand that as there's nothing there yet. So I don't think there's any issue that we really need to deal with here other than write this up this way for empty topic. Right. I guess we can probably take questions after I get through explaining all of these. There's no one at the queue now anyway, right? Okay, next slide, please. Now, lifetime of the topic, we just wanted to use the thing okay, so the idea is that we would create a query parameter, topic lifetime TLT, and you can supply that on creation. If you don't supply that, it's just topics live until you remove them. Basically, that when you create a topic, the counter begins to count down, and every time you publish to the topic or repeat the create operation, like we did with RD, that would refresh the counter to the value. Of course, if you're doing the recreate operation, you can supply a different lifetime value if you want. And then when the counter reaches 0, the topic's removed, and that's basically the idea there. Right, next slide, please. Okay, data lifetime, we just wanted to handle with max age, because that's already in place. And the default would be to just have the pub sub broker not return anything and allow 60-second max age on all responses. So that's not ideal for all situations, but it's a useful default. Then we want to enable a data lifetime option as well, a DLT, that when you create a topic, you can have a data lifetime default, and that would set max age on publish. So that would basically allow publishers to have a max age that was different from 60 seconds. So if you wanted long-lived values, you could use this. And also there's some talk of creating a header option that just could be used by push notifications to set the lifetime of the data they're sending, and so that would be an option also. But I think in the draft well, I'll show what we conclude later. Next slide, please. Yeah, so lifetime of topic contents, that's basically what I just said. So the idea of there being max age value of 0, the value is still sent, and the cache, if it's the cache behavior, the default behavior of caches is that when max age is 0, the cache can use the value but not reuse it, I believe is the way it looks. So if we have a subscriber kind of emulate that same behavior, that would seem to be reasonable. Like, so if it's a client library, the client could, for example, signal that the max age was 0 and ask the application not to use the value, for example. And then a cache that subscribes to a broker could just use max age the way it's used to. Okay, so here's what we concluded then. Next slide. So the proposed profile. So I was going to write this stuff up in the draft, but it looks like there's enough here that I didn't get around to it. I wanted to just present what I'd want to put in. So the idea is the first option for empty topic is that the broker won't respond, and topic creators are responsible for publishing empty representations, and then we'll give some examples. So this is what I plan to write into the draft. Right, next slide. For the topic lifetime and data lifetime, we'll add the 2 query options. The default, if you don't supply DLT, is just to respond without the max age option, and that allows the default on all responses to be 60 seconds. If DLT is included, then notifications are sent with DLT and max age option. And then if you read and subscribe sometime after a thing has been published with DLT, you get a max age equal to DLT minus the the times, basically as described in RFC 7252. Number 3, please. Next slide, sorry. Yeah. So if the topic lifetime is included, the topic will be removed anytime there is no published activity or topic refreshed for a time equal to a topic lifetime. And when that happens, outstanding subscribers and new requesters will be sent 404s. Resource not found. So that's basically how we plan to cover it in the draft. Questions, issues, other ideas? Okay. Someone getting up? Yeah. Okay.
Klaus Hartwig. I have 2 comments. The first one is, could you go to the proposed profile 1? We have been talking a lot about pub subtopic configuration, and I think if we have things like publishing an empty representation for a topic, it might make sense to be able to update this representation at a later date. So one idea could be to split the topic into 2 co-op resources. One configuration resource, which exists for the whole lifetime, and then a data resource, which is what the publisher has published to and the subscriber subscribed to. And then you could simply say you create the configuration resource, but if it does not have content yet, the data resource does not exist yet, and it's created when a publisher publishes for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And this would give you this CRUD resource for creating, reading, updating, and deleting topic configurations. My other comment is, I think it was on number 2. No, number 3. No, number 2, sorry. The comment is on MaxAge. When a publisher hasn't published for some time, like the broker hasn't received a publication for 24 hours, do we really want to say that I can give you a representation now, but it's very likely that you will get an update like in 0 seconds, so you shouldn't even try to cache this. I think we need to distinguish between the data lifetime and the mechanism of keeping the observation alive and not generate needless traffic just to try to map the data lifetime into the MaxAge.
Christian Amses, thank you. I think on the topic of having those empty representations that could be done a lot more smoothly, if so as I understand right now, when a topic is created, all the metadata is put in there, whether it's part of the link to that's created for the topic or as registration as options for the creation. And I think that this metadata could be a very suitable place to indicate that this topic has some kind of testament, last will, tombstone, whatsoever representation that the publisher may use to satisfy observations on that resource, which would align nicely with metadata on topics on resources that are not topics, because such metadata could just as well be expressed about any other resource. And when a client gets that, it could look up in the metadata that, hey, it's not there, but it has a default representation I can pass on to the application.
Carsten Bormann from the floor. When I look at this, the proposed profile 1, we seem to be extending the architecture with long poles now, which may be a good thing or not a good thing, but I think we should do this very consciously. As Klaus mentioned, there may be situations where having the broker not respond immediately to something may be more efficient. So a mild form of long poll may actually be efficiency improving. But this, of course, could be a situation where a topic has been created and two days later the first data is published to it. And then you would finally get the response to the request you sent in. So I think we have to consider whether that is an evolution of the architecture that we actually like. The other observation on the architecture, I think Klaus has already made, but I want to repeat it because I want to focus on the architecture right now. Where is that here? It's nowhere. Anyway, if a publish needs to include DLT, data lifetime query option, then this query option, of course, is part of the UI, and by being that, is also part of the cache key. So that publish doesn't replace any cached instances that might be lying around. So having a no cache key data lifetime option actually is something that might make a lot of sense. Now, adding options also is impacting the architecture. So again, that's something that we would need to think about, but it might be useful here. And the third observation was already made, that maybe having a control resource and a data resource that might be a good thing. And if I were designing this from scratch, then of course I would make a control resource that actually is a multi-part core that has both some control structure and potentially optionally initial value of the topic.
Yeah, I think it fits in here. So as I understand, currently the kind of control resource is implemented as just using a different content format. I think that doing something like that has given us a bit of trouble in the resource directory as well. So having separate resources for metadata and the actual data makes sense, and also frees up PubSub topics to actually transport link format or similar data. Because right now, getting the link data on the topic means getting the metadata, and that means you can't have actual link format data on the topic.
Peter van der Stok, now something completely different. We still intend to use the broker as a proxy for the sleepy nodes. It seems to be slowly disappearing. I hope you can still look at the requirements we have written some time ago and make sure that the broker can be used as such.
Ari Keränen on the floor. Yes, Peter, yeah, it can still be used for that purpose too. There is the read interface exactly for that use case. There's the subscribe interface and read interface, and the read interface is the classic use case you are referring to. So that's still possible. And in general, the theme of this update was that we're actually simplifying a lot of things. So you could use co-op client roughly as such to interact with a PubSub broker. And then when you do more advanced things, like lifetimes and such, then you would have to do a bit more advanced procedures. But the basic functionality would be very simple for any vanilla co-op client to do.
My concern was that it is very much concentrated on using observe. And there is an action with this proxy, with this mirror server, if you like, where you just do an inquirement what the latest status of a topic is, without doing an observe of it, or setting the topic.
Yes, so we'll be mostly talking about that interface, which is heavily based on observe. But there is also the basic read interface, which is essentially the same, except for one bit. You don't enable observe. So, but it's just that the observer part is slightly more complicated because of these data lifetime issues.
Okay, I think we have had some good discussion, but not really a conclusion yet. And I think Michael can use this, or the PubSub authors can use this for generating a next version and proposing a solution to those problems. And then the working group can decide whether we're done with this. And no, we are not going to forget that we are working with sleeping nodes. Dynelink, we are about 10 minutes behind schedule. Actually, we are 10 minutes behind the end of the segment already, so you have to do this in minus 10 minutes, please.
Okay. Hello. So Dynelink, yeah, that's not very much to mention. We actually managed to finish a fairly big chunk of work already. And then at the end of February, we had a flurry of activity when we actually had a joint call with the OMA 11 M2M folks. And then the current draft reflects that. So there were clarifications that were done. We restructured the draft so that we have conditional notification attributes that can be used with general observe requests, and then that introduces the whole document. And then we changed the data types for pmin and pmax so that we can support fractional second timing. Previously, they were just integer values. And also there was a clarification made about when the notifications will be sent, particularly for LT and GT. So right now they are notifying on all crossings, not just up or down. We also had some discussion with the people from the 11M2M group about the ban attribute. I don't really believe, was there anybody in this room from that meeting? Because we were also discussing about some alignment with the 11M2M documents regarding the description for the different attributes. So the consensus from that meeting, I believe, if I remember correctly, was that we'll wait for some information from the 11M2M folks on if they would like to contribute some text to the document. So that's basically the major part of it. And then the last part was basically about the binding table. So we changed the binding table description so that we have a new attribute value instead of an interface description. So that led to a small confusion on how we actually do the binding tables, because we were not in favor of keeping the post operation. And this was the old example in draft 7, which was about a resource collection called BND, which you can manipulate using post, get, or delete. But we're still working on this a little bit. So I think we'll get this done fairly soon. So right now you discover the entry point to the binding table, and then we just have get and put. We'll have to think about how we do patch and fetch quite soon on that. And that's basically it. So the work on the notifications are completed, link bindings are completed. So that's just the partial changes that are needed for the binding table, and maybe we get something from the 11M2M folks, and then we're ready. Oh, yeah, that's the last slide from. Christian.
Christian Amsus, I'd just like to point out that there should be a mail somewhere around the mailing list with some still unaddressed concerns about particular binding types that were incomprehensive.
I couldn't actually hear you because they're so loud. Could you?
Yeah. So there was a comment on which binding types there are, and that this should probably not be written out as a comprehensive list and be open to some scenarios that kind of fit easily with what is written there, but it's just a list that is a bit too short, or maybe should just go away. But there's a comment on the mailing list. Please make sure to follow up on that.
Yeah. And I forgot to add one thing that we also included into the document was basically the use of pmin, because there was some confusion. Can you hear me?
Yeah. The use of, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So the use of pmin to clarify which value should be sent when pmin expires. So that's now been clarified in the document also. Yeah.
So I have one question. When do you think this document will be ready for written Pascal?
I actually think that it should have already been ready now. Then the binding table just needs a bit of work. So I'll discuss with Michael and we'll get this done. Maybe the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then I think it should be. Well, of course, we've got to wait for Live M2M people also if they want to contribute some text. But that's out of our hands at the moment.
Right.
And they were supposed to contribute to our GitHub issue tracking. So.
Okay. So the procedure is we wait for the next version. We do two things in parallel, which is a chairs review and contacting the OMA people, and then we do the working.
Yeah, that's fine. We could do it that way. All right. So
because we want to get below those 27 documents.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's get this one done. I don't anticipate much. I mean, it's fairly stable right now, so there's not much else in that document.
Wonderful.
Okay, next one is, I'm not sure, are you going to take care of this?
I can do that.
Yeah. You want me to be here or shall I?
Just stay here or
I'll stay here.
on
Okay.
that microphone or stay
All right,
wherever
okay.
you want. So one of the first drafts that we actually did in this working group, like 2012, was core interfaces. And that was an early draft that actually consolidated our ideas about how this was going to work quite well. And actually, it has been an influential draft because it has been taken over by other SDOs who then adapted it. They didn't just do what we wrote, but they did something better, changed. So right now, there's actually no literal adoption of this document. Just since there were a few recommendations that kind of have been overtaken by events. And we looked at it and decided, there is some useful text in there. And actually it turns out that in particular the text on collections would fit into a series of small documents that the research group is about to generate. So this is non-normative text that just describes one way of doing things, and that would fit with the RESTful design document as a parent document. And actually, if you look into the charter mentioned this document as one place where there will be interaction with the research group. So the interaction in this case would be push it over the wall and ask the research group to use the good parts. So I just wanted to hear the opinion of the room. I already asked on the mailing list, and I think we had one response to that. Any other opinion on that?
As the people who have been working on core interfaces, I think this is a good idea. We could, so there are basically two parts. I mean, it's a very well-written document. It's very small and it's easy to understand. I believe that at least some ideas would fit very well with the Internet of Things research group. So that's a good thing. And then the other part is probably, yeah, like you said, other SDOs have overtaken. So, yeah.
Peter van der Stok again. I have found this document very useful in the early days when I had to start with co-op and see how I have to structure documents and how to structure applications. And fantastic text for that, and with some of the additions, I think it should be maintained. Yeah.
I think we all agree that burying is the wrong subject line. So it's really about throwing it over the wall and getting it published in a slightly different context. Okay.
To clarify, we're not going to bury it.
We are not
Yeah.
burying it, we are throwing it over to the research
Right.
group.
Yes.
Make it part of a series of documents.
Yeah.
Good. So thank you, Bill. And I hope you will participate in writing those documents. Next, resource directory. And we are 25 minutes behind schedule. Yes.
Okay, hello then, I'll try to make it brief. So resource directory is as of -20 in working group last call since last Wednesday. We've started to receive comments during the working group last call, one of which is an update to the security considerations from Klaus. That should not pose much difficulties. It's just to help explain, basically to give the reader a better impression of how that would actually, of what would be an example of such policies. Ted Lemon pointed out an outdated reference where we are describing how this might interact with RDD and SSD, and gave an example based on a probably 2-year-old version of RDD and SSD, which doesn't fully fit with DNSSD. So that example would probably just go out, and it was one way of discovering that is not fully fleshed out. Could still be added if DNSSD thinks that this is with RDD, if RDD and SSD thinks that this is something that is needed. And last but not least, I managed to still leave some errors in the examples that are confusing people, and thanks for pointing them out. I can fix them. So just to summarize, we've had 3 interrupt events by now, and I think I've missed 2 implementations that were work in progress with the last interrupt. But the sequence of events shows that that we have found ambiguities and problems that arise from doing it in practice with the first interrupts. And with the third, we've already gone on to experimenting what more we can do, what extensions we can use. For example, using the Coral format to express the content of the resource directory, which Klaus will later follow up on, because we have shown in the interrupt that we can have a registrant register with link format at a resource directory, and that resource directory would then expose the information in Coral to someone doing a lookup and trying to find resources and find out metadata, and that did work. Although, of course, the format of how we do it in Precise will still change, but yeah, so that worked. And I think the working group last call is in good progress, and by the 17th of April, I hope that we can go on with this. Questions so far?
Bill, thanks for the good draft. That was clarify a lot of things, and also thanks for the good discussions we had over the hallway meetings. That uncovered some of the example problems. But that's okay. That's another. I just want to clarify one thing regarding. So we were discussing this also with Christian. So I just wanted to raise this issue that there is some text in resource directory that says currently the cardinality of what was this?
Cardinality of the registration base.
Registration.
Which
Yeah,
interacts
cardinality
with
to the
protocol
base.
negotiation,
The base attribute was 1. And in future, you might have multiple base values, and then you refer to the protocol negotiation. So I want to clarify that. I don't really mind if you keep that text in, but there's a very high chance that protocol negotiation is not going to have multiple base values. So that's what I wanted to say. So you could have base values, but the semantics of what we're trying to do is a bit different from base.
Yeah, that should probably mean that's another case of one of those forward references. It would probably later be that, which we should adapt to the kind of state of the art and possibly move out of the possibly remove from the document.
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. So yeah, just
see
keep
Peter
that as a
nodding.
placeholder
That's
so that yeah, you
good
remember
indication that we can do it that way.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. So if there are no more comments, I'd like to move to the second part of the RD slot, that is a brief report on what I've presented to T2TRG on Tuesday. I've previously in London presented the resource directory replication to this group, and it was then decided that it better fits with T2TRG. So the kind of the big picture here is that it is possible with the resource directory to replicate it without doing full application level replication, but rather to have the to have several resource directories meshed up with each other. Results from that have been incorporated into the resource directory document proper that allows those kind of interactions, and that, in my opinion, is something that can go on without impeding work here, and this is basically mainly to notify that this is going on in T2TRG from now on. Peter?
Peter van der Stok. If this document goes out, I think some text in the beginning which tells you what the replication is supposed to serve, which purpose it is supposed to serve, is very important. Yeah, because at this moment people have different ideas about replications and they have very different consequences for the protocols you're going to use.
I think the latest version should have a text in there that lies out a few of the goals, which are mainly not being distributing in order to cope with a great load of requests or registrations, tolerance to failure, and I think there was a third one that I just don't remember out of my head because it probably is a kind of overlap area. But I'll make sure that the document will outline why it is done in precise words. Another thing that was presented over there that leads us basically over to the protocol negotiation part again is what I started to call the RD-Link project. That is trying to integrate the whole vision of how cryptographic identifiers can be used in order to have URIs that work all across the internet without necessarily being integrated with a centralized infrastructure. That depends on protocol negotiation and alternative transports. And the work on especially alternative transports has been taken up again for within the overlap area between this working group and T2TRG, because it turns out that there are many questions that we still need to answer that are not just specify how it works and be done with it, especially when it comes to the topics of URI aliasing, which we try to avoid, and having a trust model that allows us to switch transports without getting into all kinds of problems about being able to authenticate that this is actually the thing to do. So there is there's a GitHub repository now in which we are kind of pooling minutes, pooling ideas. I should probably have put the link in there. I can follow up with that on the mailing list. So if you're interested in protocol negotiation and Core plus AT, please let us know. Please watch that repository, because this is something that will eventually become relevant to Core again, but may in the meantime be processed in T2TRG just because there's such a wide variety of how things could actually go, and we don't have a very clear way forward yet, but have to do some experimentation as well.
Thank you. In 12 Minuten kannst du das großartig.
Hello, I would like to talk about Coral. Over in the T2TRG, we have been working for some time on the constrained RESTful application language, Coral. There are now a bunch of internet drafts related to that. And the first two, the constrained resource identifiers and the constrained RESTful application language, are now coming out of this being a research topic and are getting some interest in being used in core applications. So the idea would be to move these drafts over to core. And series are a CBOR-based encoding of URIs in the same option style that we use in core. You can see one example here. It's a URI that you would normally write as coop://example.org : and so on. And Siri takes the components of the URI apart and then puts it into a CBOR array where each component has an option identifier in front of it. And you can see the CDDL notation here. And the idea is that we want to allow constraint devices to perform URI arithmetic in a small amount of code, covering all corner cases and doing that correctly so. And this has been developed as part as Coral, but then extracted into a separate draft because it's not only useful in Coral, but could also, for example, be used in the SenML CBOR format or in CWT or in suite manifests, for example. Then Coral itself, if you're familiar with link format, it's basically link format on steroids. It has a data and index model for building applications where machines can navigate between resources by following links that we already have in link format. But it can also describe operations on resources by submitting forms. So essentially, a Coral document tells you if you have a Coral representation of a resource, what is it that resource, what can you do with the resource, and how does the resource relate to other resources. And it also fixes a bunch of problems that we have in link format. For example, link format has these very weird rules for generating the link anchor and is not very extensible in link format attributes. And Coral comes with the two serialization formats. The primary format is again based on CBOR, so it's suitable for constrained devices. A typical Coral document can be expressed in a small amount of bytes and can also be processed by a constrained device without taking a lot of additional RAM. But because it's so compact, it's very hard to read for humans. So there's a companion lightweight textual serialization format that is used mostly for giving examples. Overall, these two documents, Series and Coral, are so far quite stable, at least on the concept level. We might want to do some optimization, for example, to compress redundant items in CBOR more efficiently. We had two meetings this IETF where we got into some details related to Coral. One was the hackathon, where we got to do some hacking on Coral. There's now a parser for the textual format, an encoder of the CBOR format for Riot OS. We created a bunch of examples and looked at different use cases, and I have some slides on that upcoming. We looked into thing description conversion to Coral and also worked on an updated Python implementation. And on Wednesday, we had a dedicated side meeting to Coral, 2 hours, and discussed topics like how could you use series outside of Coral, some technical discussions on comparing series. We briefly looked into the conversion between Coral and RDF and link format, and discussed the concept of forms. And also had a bit of higher level discussion. Are those real hypermedia applications as envisioned by using Coral actually feasible? And also had some discussions related to possible working group adoption. So here now I have very quickly a few examples how the text format looks like. You have to imagine that those can be expressed in CBOR very compactly. So one thing we can do with Coral is just use it as a simple replacement for link format. It looks like this. And this is an example taken from RC 6690. We had the hackathon one example called Carsten's Coffee Machine, which is essentially a collection resource of queued coffee orders. So you can create, update, read, delete coffee orders. And this is how it would look like in Coral. Here's an example of a thing description converted to Coral. The original thing description is shown here on the left-hand side. It's a bit longer. And if you assume that you're using CoAP then the thing description collapses nicely in these into these very few lines of text. And as one exercise, we extracted some vocabulary from the IPSO definition files. And for example, if you want, you could now use the IPSO reusable resource definitions inside your Coral-based applications. Our conclusion from Hackathon and the site meeting was Coral works. We have tried it for resource discovery and more, and there was even a bit of an interop moment when Christian's and Jim's resource directory implementations got interoperate using Coral. I have created a GitHub repository with companion material, so the drafts themselves are a bit low on the example side. And the idea is we create a GitHub repository, and there you can find the CDDL and ABNF grammars, the code extracted from the drafts, test vectors for unit tests, and the idea would be to create lots of examples and maybe tutorials and more introductory material inside this GitHub repository instead of putting that into the RFC. We also started collecting some open issues on the GitHub repository. There are now 10+ open issues, and those are actually in a state where they would benefit from working group input, and where it's no longer just a decision by a single author to resolve those. That was my Coral and Siri pitch, and hopefully less than 12 minutes.
Thank you. I need the other 2 minutes to ask a question. So given that we have reached the state that Klaus has reported, is it time to do the working group adoption here? So we have lots of documents. Of course, not all of them are actually something that this group would be working on. So the two documents that to me seem the candidates for going into the engineering phase are the Coral document itself and the Siri document, which is needed as the URI representation we use inside Coral documents. So my question would be, are we ready for adopting these? There I've seen one thumbs up. This room is useless for hums, so I will show of hands. What's the number you got? So 8, 9, 4. So who is against working group adoption of these two documents? Okay, so we will report this as in-room consensus and verify the consensus on the mailing list, but not do a working group adoption call, but just verify that the consensus we already reached here. Thank you. So the final point on the agenda is new work that Jin Zhao, hello, can you come up, has started on speedy blockwise transfer.
A small question about the agenda.
Small question on Zoom.
Yes?
RDD and SSD has disappeared.
Oh, you wanted to say something about that? Do you have
Well,
slides
I
for
sent
that?
in slides, you might infer.
I didn't see those slides, I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay now, but...
Do you want to quickly say something? I think that would be useful.
Yes, it's going on very nicely. We still want to do some things until end of July. We have separated out all the automatic conversions, and for the service type, we have defined an ST parameter, which makes things much more clearly, and we think we will be done by July. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for the short interruption, and I think this is important information, and I apologize for dropping those slides, and we are looking forward to seeing this happen. And now
Okay.
back to the
Hello. Actually, I didn't expect to have the opportunity to present this because normally the working group is very tightly scheduled. Anyway, I put a couple slides, and I always want to keep it very simple. This is a speedy CoAP block-wide transfer. The problem being the client not in the current space, in the current RFC, the client needs to send continuously requests to the server, and using the block option to specify the exact segment then that is expected each time. That means we do a lot of round trips there. And such a design was a reasonable choice since the server can be implemented to be a truly stateless and lightweight. But is there some lead and some scenarios that we can speeding up this? For example, during the firmware update, well, a large object, a large file is going to be loaded to the sensor, or the device is going to conduct a critical mission conversation with some server. And the other cases, there are cases that the server is actually more capable than the original CoAP assumption, which means that they can be more stateful in handling this. So what we are actually proposing is a speeding up block option called S here. And in the speed up option, the client can specify the speedy window size there. For example, 5 here. Then the server can send just the 5 segments to the client just in one conversation, right? As the reply in the reply. And this is a little bit more tricky if because we put this because the client basically know its requirement and its limitation or its constraint requirement. So for example, here the client says that I can got 5 packets in one return pass, but actually the file is divided into more than 5 segments. So the server will just send 5 segments to the server or to the client, and each 5 segment, each speedy window, the client needs to reply with an ACK, and then the server can send more. This can, speed up the conversation as well as keep the clients as a constraint device. There are some more details in the draft, and I think there are more questions to be answered. For example, how to design this. Probably this is not the best way, but I think this is one of the possible way, and this is just very small fix here. We can have block S speedy, I put here, the block S means a speedy block option here, so that the client can inform the server about the speedy window it would like to use. Yeah, that's it. And this is anyway a small fix. Do you have any interest or any scenarios that can be? Please.
Hello, this is Christian Amsus. I have 2 things that I want to point your. I see the use cases. I've run into them myself occasionally, but I think this could profit from looking into 2 pieces of 2 areas here. First is using nstart greater than 1, which is something that was, I think, always envisioned to be possible, but not really actively worked on recently. That would kind of simplify the model quite a bit by just sending several requests without waiting for all the blocks to come in. That would not give you all the efficiency that you are envisioning here, but might give sufficient speed ups without making the model any more complicated, short of negotiating that nstart greater than 1 is okay. And if it then turns out that this is still not enough, you may want into what is going on with non-traditional responses, because there comes in all the topic of how would the server even know on which token to reply, etc. But my gut feeling is that it wouldn't need to come to this when one looks into nstart greater than 1 for, say, 80% of the applications.
Okay, so you are saying that you have made this scenario, but what's the solution you just mentioned?
Nstart greater than 1, which would mean that the server is at leisure to keep send several messages to the client, the client would be at leisure to send several requests at the same time without lockstepping and waiting for each response to arrive. That is possible. That is not. There is no particular definition of how to arrive at those larger nstart numbers. But if you say here that 5 is a number that works for you, that could just as well be a number that you could try out things with, and then send several requests without waiting for the response, and only send more requests as the responses trickle in.
So one more question, is there a solution you just described, the document anywhere?
I am not aware of any document that gives implementations leisure to use nstart greater than 1, but I might easily be wrong, and someone more familiar with all the old documents may answer that.
Okay.
Hi, did you do some analysis on the performance improvement you're getting out of this?
I think we have done some very simple verification of this. I think it's very obvious because, for example, here, the original way you should send 5 requests for 5 block items, but now you just send 1 request. There's only 1 RTT happening, 1 round trip.
Yes, but there's also, I don't know if maybe you did that already, sent this to the transport working group to just see, or the transport area working group, because there's obviously a congestion control issue here. Like you picked the number 5, but I could say I picked the number 1000, and so I'm very fast, but I don't think it's that easy. Or I'm sure it's not that easy.
But now I think because we have the CoAP over TCP defined, already specified by you, right? And if you are using TCP, this is obvious because we have a lot of blocks to send, and that's normally a case that TCP should handle, and TCP congestion control is so stable and can make the internet very stable.
Okay, so you envision this to be mostly used with CoAP over TCP?
Can be used either for UDP also, because we have CoCoA, we have 2 CoAP congestion control algorithm defined in this working group, and this can be proved also safe for the conversation over UDP.
Okay, so I'm seeing some interest in this, and also seeing interest in exploring related approaches, for instance, with increased nstart. So I think we should encourage you to continue work on this, and maybe also explore those alternatives with the people who have the ideas in mind. And we are looking forward to another presentation in Montreal.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we are closing 90 seconds early this time. Thank you very much for making the time this time. And there's a lot of actions, and I probably should have mentioned, it has been said before, we will have interim meetings, and we have a large number of working groups that will be coordinating to run a weekly interim meeting probably at late Wednesday European time, early Wednesday US time. And I think once the Easter break is over, we will continue this, and we will have some core slots in this repetition of interim meetings, and we will continue moving things forward so we can get more documents off our plate now that we have added 2 more to it. Thank you. Have a nice trip back.
To avoid head of line blocking. So TSP has this third thing. Everything you need, this thing is kind of reduced by that. So you wouldn't use things else.